I really want to transition about identifying attachment trauma in my life, and what I did not fully know was attachment trauma, but I started to pay attention to certain symptoms through my life experience. And it was very painful. It was the relationships that, did not work out for me. So one image, there's some vignettes that I pulled together, multiple vignettes that then collectively together, they're all pointing towards, oh, these are symptoms of attachment trauma, or this was uncovering the activated attachment trauma. And I used to go in Chicago. There was a group called Healing Circle, not a very terribly, creative name, but Healing Circle was a Reiki healing group and offered other kind of modalities around energy healing and body work, and just a collective, lovely group of people who really valued staying focused on participating in healing processes. It was very educational for me and very loving. And I went every week, almost every week, every Tuesday. And it would be like from 7 to 9:30, and then afterwards a core group of us would go out to a diner and talk for hours and hours and hours about healing and healing work. And when I dated someone for only 2 weeks, and it had a lot of promise, and I was 27-ish age, and I met him, and for 2 weeks it really felt like, oh my gosh, like finally, like I really think that I'm going to be in a substantial relationship, and the caliber of person, and we really have a lot in common, and this is so amazing and so wonderful. And it did not work out. It ended really quickly. It was so much projection, within 2 weeks, it just activated all this like profound longing and a kind of sense of like, oh, I no longer need to suffer in my aloneness and loneliness. And I couldn't hold back. I had very little internal control around allowing myself to believe that this was the start of something. And when it ended, I'm at Healing Circle, and I had a number of friends there, and one particular friend, her name is Jen Gargrave, and I was in the hallway. It was at Ann Sather's restaurant on Belmont Street in Chicago. They serve cinnamon rolls. They're known for their cinnamon rolls. So just imagine the whole place smells like cinnamon rolls. Like when you eat there, you don't order cinnamon rolls. It just comes by right. When you go to a Mexican restaurant, they bring tortilla chips and salsa to the table. When you go to Ann Sather's, they just bring a cinnamon roll to the table. It's just part of the whole thing, and it's gigantic, actually. So I'm in this space upstairs, the banquet area, the banquet rooms. We had generally the whole space to ourselves, and there'd be up to 40 to 60 people show up for Healing Circle for practicing Reiki on each other. And I'm in the hallway, and Jen is there because I start vibrating my body, and I'm just crying, and I'm wailing. I'm accessing this deep hurt and longing and pain, and I had never heard that sound come out of my voice. And something in me, the observer self, pulled out and said, like, Alan, pay attention to the sound. Alan, pay attention to the intensity of this wailing and this crying. And pay attention to how your body's vibrating. Something is going on, Alan. And although I didn't fully know in that moment, that collectively I remembered that moment, and that's attachment trauma. That is a symptom of attachment trauma. The depth of that pain was what's that word? Inconsistent, but the word incongruent. It's incongruent. What happened, meeting a stranger for 2 weeks and hitting it off and thinking, oh, we might be in a relationship, and it doesn't work out, it ends. But the depth of the devastation, for many of us with attachment injuries, ending equals abandonment, ending equals rejection, ending equals the end of the world. Our brain doesn't even fathom, can't even integrate there can be no ending. Ending is death. And we just go into a tailspin. And that was one of the very first tailspins. And I had another tailspin so many years before that. So it wasn't my first experience. But it was the first time I had that observer self noticing that crying and that wailing, and Jen Gargrave, she's rubbing my back, and she's holding my hand, and she's a witness, and she's a support, a great support. But I was thinking, like, where the hell is this coming from? There is a depth of pain that is so outrageous, and that I find myself losing it in public in the hallway of this restaurant. Something is going on here. And I very quickly thought, oh, this must be the death of my father. This must be the unresolved grief, the unaccessed grief from my father. I just told the story of the client and his grandfather. So I'm also thinking, like, well, maybe this is not about the person I was just dating for 2 weeks. This has to be about something else. I think this is about my father. Which brings me to another story in Healing Circle, is that one day there was a woman who showed up. She knew many people there. I just didn't know her. I didn't see her before. And her name, her name is Jenny Landfield, and Jenny shows up. And a number of people are like, hi, and we're in a circle, and there's a presentation going on. So, we're all being quiet to be respectful to the presenter. But something very bizarre happened to me when I'm sitting there with Jenny, or when Jenny enters. I felt this profound pulling, like a magnetic pulling in my chest, and I could not keep my eyes off of Jenny. And I just energetically felt this strong pull. And when the presentation was over and the Healing Circle, we came to an end, and then there's a socializing aspect afterwards of just talking. And Jenny's talking to a couple people. They're in a little circle, and I walked right over to her and I said, I do not know who you are, but you have something that I need. And keep in mind, she literally looks like a witch, and I say that lovingly, like there's nothing negative about that. But she had this like gray hair that was a bit, windswept, and she was wearing layered clothes, like a dress, a black dress, and doesn't necessarily have to be black, but like dark colors, and she just looked like a witch, and she rather at times can look a little eccentric. And so I approach this witch. I say, you have something that I don't know what it is, but I need it. And so there's a pause, and then she says, there's someone in your past who's died, who is a male figure. Is it your grandfather? Maybe your father? Did your father die when you were younger? And I said, yes, actually he did. He was when I was 14. And then she pauses a little longer, and she just starts weeping. So this stranger I never knew, she knew nothing about me. She identifies my father died, and then she just really lovingly looks at me in her eyes. She's really lovingly looking at me, and she says, your father is so proud of you. He just wants you to know that he sees what you're doing, and he's just so glad that you found your way, and that he sees you. And that phrase is so important for me, for someone who has attachment trauma, and not really going to go into a lot of my history with my father here, but he and I really didn't have a relationship. So to have this stranger out of nowhere, through her weeping and compassion, identify the loss of my father, but then as a conduit say, he's here, he sees you, and he cares about you, was incredibly moving, and speaks to a number of mystical experiences that I had through Healing Circle. I'm going to change focus in a vignette. That's the first vignette. That's the wailing, the crying at Ann Sather's. The next vignette is the story about the Virgin Mary. And she represents to me the great feminine, and as an archetype of complete feminine loving compassion. And the phrase, it begins and ends with the feminine. And although technically I was raised Catholic and introduced, was a part of some Catholic upbringing, when I say the Virgin Mary, it does not link in my brain to anything Catholic, although technically, historically that image, she is a part of that. It's more of the archetype of the great loving feminine. And she is the seat of all relationship, and she is the seat of all healing. And again, it begins and ends with the feminine, the place of the birth. And she's an attendant and a receiver of the death. If you think of the Virgin Mary prayer, pray for us now at the hour of our death, amen. So there's this life cycle aspect and really aligning in the goodness of the great feminine will bring me to relationship. And this was a time of great longing, still living in Chicago, and I painted Virgin Mary statues, or I had one that I wanted, and it actually was Saint Teresa, and I used to joke and say, well, it's Saint Teresa incognito as the Virgin Mary, because I liked the Saint Teresa statue a little better than I liked the mold of the Virgin Mary. And so I said, well, I'm going to pretend she's the Virgin Mary, even though technically she was Saint Teresa. And I painted her, like in this copper patina. So she basically looked like the blue-green color of the the Statue of Liberty. And so there's this idea of like nurturing, like if I align myself with the great feminine, and if I acknowledge the healing powers of grieving is a quality of and an extension of feminine energy, and would this prepare me and invite someone into my life for a relationship. And I would meditate a lot at this time, and it was in my one-room apartment, and I had hardwood oak floors. And what I'm going to say sounds a little dramatic, but I meant it sincerely. I didn't mean to be dramatic. I would put my face on the floor. It was this idea of really being humble and getting as low as I could to just kind of see one problem in the dynamic of seeking the archetype help, whatever symbol we use for help. In this example, it's Virgin Mary. It's still putting me in a position of being depleted or deprived, or that there's an emptiness. And I'm saying, please, Virgin Mary, if I pray to you with such great sincerity, will you please give me a prize? Will you please grant me something I don't have? So all the power is placed onto, this the archetypal symbol, and it still leaves me standing in my state of depletion and longing and absence. And with attachment trauma, we know absence. We know what it's like, non-relating. We're trained to tolerate the disconnect and to live for many years in relationship, or what I call non-relationship. And we tolerate the absence. So it still was perpetuating, it was still upholding adhering to the relationship as absence, because I'm praying to the Virgin Mary saying, oh, I'm still absent. Please give me something that will fill it up. And what I was praying for is relationship. Like, please, I really want to be in a relationship. I need to practice. I really, really need to practice. And I would get really low on the floor, and the cold oak floor would touch my cheek. And it's a Chicago, I don't remember, it's winter, but Chicago's cold, so that floor was cold. And one day I'm at a thrift store. One day I'm shopping at the thrift store, and I see someone, and our eyes meet, and you immediately know, that look, that feeling, where it registers very quickly, like, okay, here's someone, okay, maybe, oh, hello. And I, looked at him, and he looked at me, and there's this moment of like, oh, how are you? So I walked over to him, said hello, we started talking. And in trying to make small talk, I said, so we're at this thrift store. I said, why are you here? What are you looking for? Just trying to think of something to say. And he says, oh, I collect Virgin Mary statues, and I'm here looking for the Virgin Mary. So imagine if this is a movie, if there's a fourth wall, he's frozen, I break the fourth wall and look directly into the camera. It's just like have this moment of like, Mary, you're so obvious, please. And I'm thinking, oh, look, the Virgin Mary, it worked. She answered my prayer. And what more of an obvious message? She's hitting me on the head with a symbolic frying pan, saying, here it is. You said you want to meet someone. And there was like no confusion for me. It's like, oh my gosh, this is exciting. Like, Andy likes the Virgin Mary. Like, we already have something in common. So that was a lovely moment. I do like that story. But that relationship did not work out, did not go very far. And the thing that I want to share with you, where the awareness of the attachment trauma is that because it didn't really go anywhere, and it wasn't, it very quickly started, he was less available, less, fewer calling each other on the phone, fewer going to the coffee shop it just, it was fizzling. But when it starts to fizzle, my activation of my attachment trauma acts up, and then I start feeling the feeling of hyperarousal, this primal panic, this urgency, which can register as life or death. Like, I need to connect with this person. Like now I'm feeling the abandonment wound is really activated. And I was at the corner of Berwyn and I think Broadway. There's a Pier 1 Imports furniture store, and there's a payphone. This is before the time of cell phones. And I can remember dialing and calling and dialing, and he's not picking up, he's not there, or it's busy. I dialed, like 15 times. And I'm very on fire in my own hyperarousal, my anxiety, and this kind of protest behavior of like, I need to connect. And again, then the observer self showed up in my primal panic, temper tantrum, and the intensity and the urgency of this life or death feeling. I was able to pull out of myself and say, Alan, what is going on? This is weird. Why are you acting like this? Why are you freaking out that you can't call someone on the phone? And why do you care? Someone that that there's not any possibility of a future of a relationship. It's already ended before it got started. And of course, that's a little harder. One reason why so many of us have a hard time in these really very minor dating scenarios is because the relationship exists in potential, and it exists in the realm of fantasy. Potential is fantasy. And we have the ability to invest a lot into the fantasy, a lot into the unknown, unaccessed potential. And when the relationship doesn't take off, then the idea of love is unrequited. And if the love existed in complete pure potential, because the relationship never got off the ground, the grief exists psychically in this realm of infinite grief. Infinite, the grief. Because the relationship has no real beginning and end, there wasn't any relationship to begin with. It's all a fantasy projection. And we access this bottomless pit of grief, and that links to attachment trauma, abandonment wound, never really fully connecting in our families the way that we needed to or wanted to or knew was possible, and some core level knew something is wrong here. And that's what happened to me on the phone. It's like this other observer self that said, Alan, why are you freaking out and dialing like you're losing your mind and losing my mind? All of this hyperarousal, that is a trauma symptom. That's attachment trauma. Now, little vignette, in addition to that, sort of rewind, not same chronological, that first story I told you at Ann Sather's, I did at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. He lived very near my apartment in Chicago. I had never done this ever in my life. I just felt, when we are in our attachment trauma, what will calm us down is proximity. We really need to connect with the other person. We really do need connection. And I found myself at 1 o'clock in the morning walking through the streets and just walking to his apartment. And quite honestly, to share this, it sounds like stalking. I was aware of the inappropriateness of it, and that was, again, that voice saying, Alan, what are you doing? why are you standing on the sidewalk outside of this person that you've only known for 2 weeks, and you're waiting to see, is the light on, is the car parked on the street, is he home, is he not home? And if he's home, I felt better. My nervous system calmed down. So I was there ultimately for self-care, but in the bigger picture of it, it does sound like stalking. And I was aware of the weirdness of my behavior. It's like, why are you doing this? Well, because this is attachment trauma. That's where it's coming from. Now, I do, perhaps some people will push back on me and give me, say I'm splitting hairs a little bit. I have over the years made a distinction between stalking and what I was doing. And that I do think of stalking, as far as that word, it being a bit charged, that there is some kind of inappropriateness around aggression and or revenge and or somehow spying on the person in a manipulative way and maybe to be hurtful. And I can clearly say that my intention at all was not to do anything confrontational in the sense of aggression or being hurtful. It was all out of being hurt and this crushing grief and heartbreak that I just did not know how to deal with. And my brain would latch onto the object, and he's the object, he's the person. I just need to see him. I just need to see him. I just need to know that he's where he's at. And if I can know that the light is on in the apartment, that gives me a little bit of an orientation where actually my nervous system calms down. Or at least that's what I discovered in that time. Fast forward, same thing, many years later, that was in, again, a rather short-term kind of relationship, and it was on again, off again, on again, off again, which was simulating trauma reenactment around try really hard to prove yourself, try really hard to get what you want, you're not going to get what you want, it's over grief. Let's do it again. Try really hard to get what you want, try to force making a relationship work. If you could just try harder, and it wouldn't work out, and then we would crash and burn and have more grief and more sadness. Let's do it again. Let's try again. Let's get together. Come on, we can make it. And I'm just like frying my nervous system. And that experience, in the same spirit of the last story, an easy segue, I'm not in love with the word, but I had like a stalking experience with it where I just showed up out of nowhere. It happened to be a rainy day, which is very, very romantic and dramatic, in the rain, on the porch, trying to say, why, making a case, let's be in a relationship. And I still had that observer self saying, Alan, this compulsive energy to beg for a relationship and to feel a complete devastation that it's like I'm dying. Hello, that has nothing to do with this person, and that's really not who you are today. This is linking to who you were in the past and what you inherited as a child. And this, in fact, this whole scenario of what's playing out, this is your attachment trauma. And I tell this story because I couldn't leave the porch. Trauma often gets worse as we get older, the more that it goes unattended. And the symptoms exaggerate, the symptoms deepen, and they come on stronger. And this one came on really strong. And I felt the freeze response, the paralysis. I could not leave the porch. Again, I had some awareness about me. I think this is attachment trauma. At that point, I had training in trauma. At that point, I'm a therapist. I had I had put two and two together of like, these are trauma symptoms. What is going on with me? Where is this trauma coming from? And it was so confusing because over time it's like, oh, this is emotional trauma, this is developmental trauma, this is relational trauma, this is attachment trauma. And that kind of diagnosing of trauma is not as concrete or easily identifiable as an event or an incident. Or, my family was in a tornado, the tornado knocked our home down, we were homeless, that was a traumatic moment. And ever since then, I've had some PTSD symptoms. That story is not true. I'm using that as an example of saying when we have things that are event-based, chronologically tracked and that we know it happened in time and space. It's much harder to put your finger on emotional, relational, developmental trauma and come to the conclusion of your diagnosis of, oh, I think that this is attachment trauma. But I had enough training at least to identify these are attachment symptoms, and it is very bizarre that this last story that I'm telling you, I knew literally 100%, and I knew from day one, I did not want to be in a relationship with this person. I knew we were totally wrong for each other. I knew it would never work, but I allowed my attachment system to link up, and perhaps we might use the phrase trauma bond, and I was trying to force a relationship in order to prove, or let me say disprove, the core beliefs around the attachment trauma. Or we could also say, I just was caught up in a pattern of trauma reenactment and playing it out with the, I found someone who would participate with me in playing out this attachment trauma, which most probably means he too has his own history of attachment trauma, and when we link up, we just love to push each other's buttons, and we're going to create an impossible, an inability to actually be in a relationship, but we're actually going to be able to ignite and activate each other's trauma. So this is a segue. I share all these vignettes, and I know that this video is long. It's kind of like a declaration. It's kind of like a manifesto. It's really laying all the cards on the table and being transparent